The following video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Because of Surfshark VPN, this hard time that we're all going through, being stuck at home and not being aware of what's going to happen in the future, is made just a bit better by blocking ads and malware from harmful sites using the Clean Web feature, but also by giving us access to everything our streaming services have to offer. For example, I can swap my little region here to Japan, and all of a sudden I have access to every episode of Rick and Morty on Netflix. You can't make me pay for live television. But on a serious note, I've been using Surfshark VPN to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure on Netflix. Right now I'm on part 4, and it's been an absolute acid trip. When you use my promo code CREEPY, you get yourself a special deal, and from now till December 1st, you can get 83% off and 4 months for free. After that, it's just 3 months free. But no matter what deal you get, there'll be a 30-day money-back guarantee, which means that each and every one of you who uses my link found in the description and pinned at the top of the comments not only gets access to amazing region-locked content, but also supports my channel basically for free and at no risk to yourself. So honestly, if you're gonna try it, now's the time. With that said, we got a new video to get into, so let's get right into it. Roll the footage.
Tonight's presentation, although edited for YouTube, contains imagery and subject matter some may find disturbing. While our program is educational, we still feel that viewer discretion is advised.
Despite what some politicians might try to say, video games can be one of the best tools for telling an emotionally gripping yet terrifying story for adults. And today we're going to be celebrating that by showcasing some of the most bizarre and truly disturbing experiences to be made in recent times. Some of these titles will be provocative and shocking, and others will be weird and on the experimental side, all still unsettling or uncomfortable. Honestly, I just found some kick-ass video games that may have gotten overlooked by mainstream audiences, and I like to share that. So, with that said, sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and prepare to be scared. These are 9 shockingly disturbing and bizarre video games.
Created by Ryan and Amy Green and a small team of devs under the name of Numinous Games, That Dragon Cancer is an autobiographical game chronicling the last moments of Green's real-life son Joel, who was diagnosed with terminal cancer at just 12 months old. It's a very heavy game that attempts to give a first-hand look at what it's like to handle a horrible disease like cancer and watch it take away someone you love very much. That Dragon Cancer uses a surreal, low-poly art style to give this game a dreamlike quality. The settings are nonsensical yet symbolic. Combine these with heavy piano and down-to-earth voiceover, and if you were to tell me that these were actual recordings from very real doctor visits, I'd believe you.
Size matters. If I know how big it is, I can face it, I can size it up.
It's quite small at this point, but unfortunately the size isn't terribly important. Any recurrence means the chemotherapy has failed. This is a tragedy.
Another tool the developers use are these sort of crude mini-games, which in some cases help to convey some of the more heavy subjects people often find difficult to put into words. During these segments, they try to give us a sense of helplessness, but all from the perspective of the toddler living through it. Honestly, it can be incredibly unsettling, but then again, so can life. We won't tell you that this is a gameplay-rich experience, but we will tell you that this entire project feels like a labor of love from not only the parents, but the developers and the community that came together and worked so hard to make it happen. In the end, That Dragon Cancer is a unique title that pulls no punches. It documents every single, painful step along the way, starting from initially learning Joel is sick, through the nights his dad had to listen to his son cry and be literally powerless to do anything about it, and ending with Joel's inevitable but no less soul-rending death. Every fight, every unpleasant thought, and every bit of emotional distress that this family goes through, it's all here. And it creates a game that exists not only to teach, not just for the family's closure, but ultimately as a memorial for Joel Green.
This terrible routine, watching you, waiting for you to wake, hoping you will never remember these days of illness and treatment. One day, I'll bring you here. Show you your tiny handprints on the wall, and you'll be annoyed that we all think of you as some big miracle. Cancer will be such a small part of all you could grow to be. You will tire of hearing about it. You won't want to see the cards and notes I saved. And I won't mind at all. I'll hold the memories of this hard day. You just leave it behind.
Lost in Vivo starts off as what feels like a pretty standard horror game, inspired by some of the best the genre has to offer. Anyone familiar with the Silent Hill series, for example, should immediately be able to pick up on its influence. Featuring dilapidated buildings and grotesque monsters, it's not surprising that this game has been described as a first-person Silent Hill, which is mostly accurate. Another more subtle aspect of Lost in Vivo inspired by Silent Hill is the idea of the urban wilderness. The urban wilderness is an archetypal myth you see in a lot of horror movies, games, and urban legends. It's the idea that maybe if you go down deep enough, or make the right turn down the wrong alleyway, or find the right sub-basement, you'll end up somewhere different. Somewhere in the city that's been forgotten about and left to grow a life of its own. A place where even though you are surrounded by the familiar shapes of doors, walls, electrical sockets, and pipes, in reality, you're in some kind of deep, cursed forest of concrete where people are no longer welcome. It might not be as obvious as a hack jump scare, but it does make the player feel as though the real enemy isn't the ghosts coming out of the walls, but the walls themselves. The official story on its Steam page claims that Lost in Vivo is a game about claustrophobia. We can assume it uses the urban wilderness to achieve this effect, and that's definitely true. Crawling through a cramped sewer pipe and smashing giant cockroaches with a hammer definitely does invoke feelings of claustrophobia, as well as being pursued by body horror ghosts through tight concrete hallways. But the true horror of Lost in Vivo doesn't come from the way it invokes claustrophobia or paranoia, or by throwing disfigured ghouls in your face. Lost in Vivo's real accomplishment is delivering horror in the form of its constant attempts to make the player feel insane with diabolical fourth wall breaks. Things like this wall that uses a texture to make you think it's a tunnel, making you think your save file has been erased, fake debug logs, noises designed to make you feel like you're hearing things, and much more. This is what makes it so effective as a horror game. Sure, you can shoot the ghosts, but at the end of the day, the real enemy isn't the monsters in the walls, it's the game itself. Lost in Vivo tricks the player into thinking they have agency, makes them think they can solve the puzzle, or smash the roach, but constantly reminds them they aren't in control. This is an absolutely must-play horror game.
Honestly, Lisa the Painful is one of the best things to come out of Kickstarter other than Night in the Woods, at least in my own opinion. Say what you want about the platform and its many, oh so many downsides, but Kickstarter for a brief period of time helped jumpstart the indie game development scene, and as a result, some of the best games ever to be made were made during its explosion. The thing about the Lisa series, however, is that whether you're talking about Lisa the First, Lisa the Painful and Joyful, or today's game, Lisa the Pointless, the series just keeps going. And many of you may be questioning what the hell I just said, because Lisa the Pointless is not on Steam, or even made by Austin Jorgensen like the other games in the series. Instead, Lisa the Pointless is a free game found on GameJolt.com by a small team of people who came together and ended up making a brutally difficult, yet satisfying Lisa experience. I also want to clarify what I mean by Lisa experience. You see, this franchise has a beautifully depicted, comedic yet grimdark world full of filth and depravity, which all translates into gameplay somehow. For example, Garbage Island, the place where the main character Alex is just thrown onto, is so foul that sometimes he'll occasionally vomit, dealing damage to himself. One of the most prominent gangs which Alex and Joel will have to contend with throughout the story is the Infinity franchise, which encourages the members to senselessly kill everyone they encounter in order to achieve higher folds of infinity, and eventually be blessed with superpowers, of course. As a result, just about every NPC will either attack on sight or be willing to fight Alex and Joel. This game, made for free, shockingly gives us the same unsettling and disturbing content that the originals do. There are a few differences, however. The main difference between Brad's journey and, say, Alex's is that Brad is a man who finds hope in Buddy and quickly falls into despair, as despite his best efforts, he becomes the same type of abusive person his own dad was, further adding to the cycle of abuse he tried to escape from, no doubt inflicting mental and physical scars on everyone unfortunate enough to be around him. Brad is the type of person who has to make decisions that hurt other people. Meanwhile, Alex has a lot less agency, as other people make decisions to hurt him. He's a man who has nothing, who sees the pointlessness in the world around him, yet somehow finds a ray of hope. Even though Joel here finds Alex at rock bottom, the place where Alex was is the same place where Joel finds possibly one of the last bullets that will fit his father's revolver. Joel gives Alex the nickname of Lucky and resolves to travel with him, never firing said bullet for fear that he may need it later, which is also reflected in the gameplay by having Joel not be able to attack directly, instead only capable of threatening and taunting his enemies by brandishing his weapon comedically. As they travel together, the two men find comfort and solace in one another. Alex and Joel sharing their past lives and memories while trying to make sense of this new world and escape it together. Even though it may seem like some days everyone is hostile and unwelcoming, or that everyone turns on the people who show them even a little bit of hope, this game says that we can still build one another up when trapped in a situation that can only be described as hell. And honestly, I think that message is beautiful. I think that a lot of us find ourselves trapped in bad situations, and this game is all about how another person who understands that a little bit can make that experience just a little bit less miserable. When one is trapped in hell, it's always good to have a good friend in close proximity.
It's within the realm of possibility that right now you could be watching this clip and wondering just what the heck is going on, especially if you've never been exposed to claymation or stop motion games before. In the world of Dujana, everything is crafted painstakingly from clay before being digitized to appear as a three-dimensional model within the game. There are entire clay cities full of clay people to hear the musings of, heaps of clay culture to take in, and even clay bands performing on clay instruments. The scanline-infused visuals and droning Middle Eastern inspired music draw everything together into an experience akin to culture shock. It's an aesthetic that's as focused and purposeful as it is ethereal and surreal. Now, this is one game that is fully aware of how it presents itself, and it isn't afraid to poke back at its would-be detractors. People who would dismiss it as just being weird, or would try to dissect that weirdness and find deeper meaning when there really isn't any. Before it even starts, it pokes fun at people who try to associate a particular message with the game. The unique way it does this is by playing one of several randomized clips of the creator telling the player that they have uncovered the true underlying meaning of the game. And this isn't the last time you'll see the game's creator, Jack King Spooner, as he shows up quite a few times throughout the game, only adding to the strange and exotic atmosphere this game strives for. Dujana is also rife with distractions and tangents that don't seem to lead anywhere, along with non-sequiturs that make the plot difficult to follow and maybe even a bit unsatisfying, possibly as a retort to the players who focus on the destination rather than the journey, or the aforementioned deeper meaning. This game has a lot more substance than its outlandish surface belies, and quite a bit to say about the concepts of death and accepting our place in the universe. The story revolves around a woman by the name of Dujana, a devout Muslim who loses her husband and child after, of all things, the passing of the family's pet hamster leads to a search for a sufficient burial place. Even this event is given a level of randomized reasoning, though it's ultimately unimportant, as Dujana cannot set things right, but rather only uncover the truth and learn to live with it. Along the way, the player sees Dujana grow and change from someone who tries to avoid confronting the notion of death, distracting and diffusing the topic with humor, to a grieving mother who must deal with and accept the deaths of her loved ones. With the help of the game's other characters, Dujana gains some perspective on what's happened to her. She learns, rather the hard way, that life is all too often unfair, and that sometimes the things we love are just stolen from us, and we're left with no recourse. We can try and distract ourselves from the inevitability of tragedies like death, but to do so is a disservice to oneself, because nobody can avoid having to come to terms with something all of us must face, one way or the other.
I suppose the subject of death and dying is something that for most people try to keep away from. What does death inform us about the nature of consciousness? Yes, this is one of the questions of our time. We have to accept death even though we are scared fucking stiff.
Helix is a lot like the sort of dream where your only option is to go with the flow and allow yourself to become lost in the surrealness of it all. The game will use all manner of tactics to confuse and disorient the player to great effect, priming them for the absolute visual trip created by artist Mason Linderoth. You may have already noticed this is another game which uses clay for its visuals and characters to communicate their stories. Much of the clay architecture, and even some of the creatures, twist and curl and bunch themselves in a way which makes the environment difficult to make sense of. Even more disorienting is the story and dialogue, with a writing style that is intentionally confusing and long-winded. From what we can tell, you take control of the main character Wayne and a number of other recruitable party members in a campaign to upheave the Lord of the Moon, a man named Gibby. Combat is just as trippy, taking place on hazy backgrounds as Wayne and company employ the use of psychic maneuvers which can be taught by televisions across the world. It can be a pain to backtrack to all of these televisions later on if you have a party member that you also want to teach all of the special attacks, but these attacks are one of the game's most memorable hooks. Each of the special attacks are accompanied by a unique animation where a pair of gloved hands traces a bizarre shape to represent the psychic technique. Helix also uses all sorts of bizarre and strange items to provide boons in combat. You'll eat hot dogs and vegetables to restore your health, or flesh as the game calls it, while sipping a delightful juice box to restore your will. Another interesting case is the frozen burrito, which can be used as a projectile or alternatively heated in a microwave in order to revive a fallen party member. According to the Helix wiki, the music was inspired by bands such as Melt Banana and Butthole Surfers. It's nothing short of an experience. There is no game over in Helix, since dying and being sent to the afterlife is just part of the experience. In fact, you'll need to pay a visit to the afterlife if you want to offer up your meat to the meat grinder. Each time you defeat an enemy in Helix, it drops meat, which can be utilized at the meat grinder to increase Wayne's maximum flesh. This essentially means that you need to die in order to spend experience points, though it seems that the intention is that you would only increase your maximum flesh when you needed to, since you had just died. Even drinking from a water cooler is a complicated and delicate process. Not only do you require some of the highly sought-after paper cups, but you also need the right know-how from an expert, like the party member Dedismuln, Deadesmoln. By the end of your journey, with all of your fantastical items and powers, encounters will become more trivial. In the final assault on Lord Gibby's Moon Fortress, Wayne will slay any enemy he comes into contact with, implying that the combat was instantly resolved in a manner similar to Earthbound. After a lengthy battle, Wayne prevails, and Gibby sputters on one final non sequitur before instantly falling apart into a collection of limbs. Wayne's party flees the moon just before it's destroyed, escaping in a spaceship just as the celestial body collapses on itself. So ends the tale of our juicy sciences who sought to render, yet sort of mostly remembered our art. It's difficult to put into words how it makes you feel when you pull that final lever to inflate the words, "the end." Some might say that it was difficult to even know what was happening until it was punctuated by the words, "the end." But at the end of the day, the plot and the gameplay were a vehicle for the outstanding and evocative stop-motion art of Mason Linderoth. Like many trips, the journey outweighed the destination.
Possibly one of the best walking simulators ever, The Beginner's Guide is a small project directed by Davey Weirden, who also worked on the Stanley Parable. Throughout The Beginner's Guide, you'll learn about a developer named Coda, who apparently went missing or is gone for some reason, all told through the lens of this narrator character, voiced by, and also named, Davey Weirden.
My name is Davey Weirden. I wrote The Stanley Parable. I want us to see past the games themselves. I want to get to know who this human being really is. And that's exactly what we're going to do here.
The narrator character and Coda often exchange emails where Coda would send a game, the narrator would play it, offer feedback, and possibly talk philosophy late into the night. The Beginner's Guide really explores the question, can you extrapolate meaning out of nothing more than computer files? Can you really get to know someone entirely and only based on their creative works? The entire time, Davey is making judgments and interpreting meanings that, if you really think about it, are just not there, or at least not intended by the developer. Then he just attributes these interpretations to Coda, as though he made them.
The beam causes you to start floating. And this is an important moment for him. Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain.
Through these strange and experimental games, you really feel like you get to know Coda as a person, and since you're talking to the narrator the whole time, you get to really feel for him and how much he admires his relationship with this game developer. It's honestly heartwarming. That's until the game flips the switch, which colors everything in a new and disturbing light.
I just felt so strongly that if I could have connected with him, that if I could have somehow made his work my own, that I would finally be once and for all happy. It was that I needed to see myself in someone else. I needed to be someone other than me. But he stopped and left, and it felt somehow like I had failed. Where did I screw up? I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you.
It turns out that the games we, the player, were playing were never meant for public use. The narrator just put this up online so it could hopefully find Coda again due to how much he idolizes him. In an attempt to give these games more meaning, the narrator pestered and harassed Coda long into the night with conversations that apparently got heated. Frustrated with Coda, the narrator edited some of the games behind his back to make them fit the themes that he wanted, so that he could talk about these games like he just did with us, so that he could feel smart.
For years, I was trying to get to know him, to understand who he actually was and what he stood for. I asked him so many times to please just tell me what his games mean to him.
And after a while, Coda had enough of this obsessive fan taking ownership of his work, making his life a miserable hell, and taking a firm hold on his mental health. We as players are right there as the realization not only hits us, but the narrator too. By the end, I was in tears. Something about the narration, themes, and vivid depictions of abuse and how Coda finally had to end it really resonated with me. Specifically the line, "I appreciate your interest in my games, but I have to ask you not to speak to me anymore." It really says a lot about the relationship between content creator and audience. How much do we owe our audiences our lives? And how much of that can we keep to ourselves? Even though this person was objectively abused and manipulated by the narrator, he still goes out of his way to leave behind this heartfelt message of him saying, "I gotta cut you out of my life. It's going to suck. I don't think you're gonna understand, but I need to move on." While the beginner's guide is certainly not for everyone, I do feel like its metafictional narrative is one of the best experiences out there. And it's one of those few games that made me feel like a better person after playing it. If that's not bizarre and unsettling, it's certainly disturbing.
There have been plenty of games that try to emulate low-fidelity graphics as a means of increasing tension. All things considered, it's a sound strategy, since our minds are invited to fill in the blanks when a picture isn't necessarily complete, and a large contingent of players have a sort of comfort and familiarity level with older games, something that can be stripped away and exploited by a well-crafted scare. And perhaps the title to most effectively use this aesthetic as a selling point is Erdorf Games' debut title, Faith, released to itch.io in 2017. With its compressed sound, limited color palette, and low pixel count, Faith's visual style is relatively consistent with the Atari, ColecoVision, or Apple II. Probably the most notable of these lo-fi quirks that the player will notice is the game's use of voice synthesizer. Often accompanied by colored subtitles to distinguish who's speaking, the audio is nonetheless so garbled and distorted that it would be difficult to tell what's being said without them. According to the game's protagonist, a certain John Ward, this isn't the first time he's found himself at the rural Connecticut setting. It's later revealed that John and his colleague had participated in a botched exorcism involving a young woman named Amy Martin at this very location. Now John is back to finish the job, armed with little more than his clerical collar and a crucifix. It's a bizarre way to do things, really, standing firm and perfectly still with the cross held high. Not only is this how you interact with objects and add them to your fairly creepy journal, but it's also how you take the fight to the forces of darkness. For instance, if you react quickly enough to turn and face the monster in the woods with your cross, you can send it howling and scampering back into the brush. But if you're not quite fast enough and it catches you, perhaps one of the game's greatest tools to unsettle the player, completely throwing them for a loop more often than not, is its bucking of the established graphical pattern to show the monster as a rotoscoped horror in the final moments as it closes in. And this isn't the only time Faith uses this tactic, but it always seems to get you just the way the developers intended, every time. What might be even more unsettling than these sudden and jarring stylistic changes are the ways in which the story can end. John will, of course, confront the possessed Amy at the abandoned Martin household, and in the process, you'll also catch wind of the shadow goings-on of the cult that Amy had become associated with. You can even find one of their offerings out in the woods, a mutilated animal which had been offered up to dark gods. John climactically marches up to Amy in the attic before lifting his cross and beginning the rites he began a year ago all over again. And even if you prevail, well, it's not over just yet. Amy makes a hasty escape out the window, leaving John with a choice.
A gun with one bullet.
There are multiple endings attainable at this point, but the most obvious course of action is to have John track Amy down and finish what he himself started over a year ago, once and for all. This will see John captured by the police, who obviously have some questions for the man driving away from the scene of a crime, dressed as a priest and keeping a recently fired rifle in his car. Unsurprisingly, turns out that stopping a demonic-possessed attacker isn't exactly a sound legal defense. This of course begs the question, just how much of what was experienced by John, and by extension the player, was real, and how much was imagined, or worse yet, hallucinated. Father John Ward, as it turns out, has never been recognized by the church to begin with, and has even been institutionalized on at least one prior occasion. Does that mean we broke into a home and shot dead an innocent girl for no better reason than our own faith? That's the most unsettling thing this game has to say, that maybe the real demons and monsters don't lurk in the darkness, ready to pounce the moment your guard is down. Instead, maybe they hide in the blind spot of your own faith, poisoning your best intentions and twisting them so you look like the monsters you condemn. And that maybe, just maybe, this could happen to anyone.
LSD Dream Emulator is the brainchild of psychedelic music/artist Osamu Sato, who, to this day, still makes trippy, out-of-this-world music. He wanted to make a game that would not have any real goal, basically a playable art project based on the dreams of Hiroko Nishikawa, an employee at the studio that ended up developing this project. What came out is hard to describe. There's no real plot, no real story, but one hell of an experience. What about the game itself? What is even happening? There are many different cutscenes, weird events, and unsettling incidents you can make happen, which the game categorizes at the end of a dream on this chart ranging from upper to downer and static to dynamic. Upper dreams are happy, and downer dreams are unsettling. Static and dynamic is a measurement showing how weird things get, or how many NPC-like characters show up in the dream. That's what this game is. You walk around and touch stuff, and sometimes a cutscene plays. Some events are guaranteed to happen, while others require luck and certain parameters to be met. This is why back in 2010 to 2011, this game saw a surge of popularity in Let's Players and creepypasta enthusiasts alike, because you don't really know what you're gonna get when you play it. The real weird, creepy events happen in the downer dreams, where you'll be walking down an empty street with only the sound of your footsteps accompanying you, when suddenly, some girl's head falls off. Sometimes you'll press the start button, and the game will blare loud static at you or play a color test or something like that. Each dream lasts 10 minutes, and as the game goes on, the dreams start to randomize and textures start to get surreal and even change depending on how close you get to them. LSD Dream Simulator is extremely unpredictable and a complete acid trip. If you're unable to get this game to run smoothly, it's at least worth watching on YouTube.
This game is conceptually disturbing and visually uncomfortable to look at, especially to people like me who can't read any of the Japanese on screen. So, with that said, what is this game? What is the story of Kamikushiki Village? It's a game where you play as the leader of the Shinrikyo, Shoko Ashihara, and your goal is to eventually carry out the deadly Tokyo subway sarin attacks that took place in real life in 1995. Before 95, the Shinrikyo was actually this massive doomsday cult in Japan that was on the verge of becoming an officially recognized religion, all centering around a god figure leader like Shoko Ashihara. Maybe that's the most disturbing thing about this, that there was this cult that was so big it was able to infiltrate society and become a part of pop culture through anime, documentaries, and, as we're gonna learn today, video games. On July 6, 2018, after exhausting all appeals, Ashihara and 6 followers were executed as punishment for the 1995 attacks, as well as other crimes. The cult is now split into 2 main groups after a schism broke them apart. As for the game itself, according to all news sources I could find, it looks like that it was released in 1995, as it was mentioned in this Game Aura article, which happens to be the same magazine that sold Hong Kong 97. The visuals are also a bit uncanny. As you can see, it's a mix of 90s 2D graphical art, anime, real news footage from actual attacks, and real pictures of real people who, I should add, were actually kidnapped and murdered by this cult, as well as pornographic content, which admittedly is pretty typical for any game released through underground sources like Game Aura, which is a magazine that was known for its shock images, software piracy, and pornographic mods. Game Aura would describe the story of Kamikushiki Village as a fun work of art straight from the bowels of hell, and compares the game to the romance of the 3 kingdoms. Finally, let's get to the real point being made here. This game is nothing more than a parody created by 2 high schoolers who worked at Happysoft and knew the creator of Hong Kong 97. Yes, that Hong Kong 97. And it's incredibly unlikely that this is a serious game created by the cult. Between the unflattering depictions of Ashihara and the focus on an act which essentially split the cult apart, and the graphic content which I can't show you, it's pretty much safe to say that this was more of a crude mockery along the same lines of Super Columbine RPG, except made in Japan. That said, real games, like actual legit ones that we can prove existed at some point, made by the cult, were in fact distributed through the same magazine before the attack. The Shinrikyo actually had their own computer stores and would sell them, and apparently they also advertised in magazines just like this one. As of now, most of the real games made by this cult is lost media, but what is known about them is that they're very simple little mini-games that talk about how great Ashihara is and show you the right way to meditate. And don't you think that a tame game meant to indoctrinate specifically children and the younger demographic is far more disturbing and shocking than this cartoon? Maybe it's best that some things remain lost. Hello, looks like you made it to the end of yet another really long video, and I do appreciate you guys for continuing to come and giving me support even if I don't upload at the most frequent rate. This video was made possible by the lovely people donating to me on Patreon. I don't want to delay this video any longer, so I don't have time to make a new graphic, but Nicholas Barr was one of the new patrons, and he's absolutely amazing. So why don't I quickly go over this? I'd like to thank Tara Workman for the $75 donation, Nicholas Barr at £71 a month, Willow Firefox at 50, William Hyatt at 50, Brian Stevens at 20, Alani at 20, Seuss Party at 20, and of course, the rest of the people. I really do appreciate you guys supporting me. I'm gonna go die, but probably Jacob, one of the other narrators in this YouTube video, can be found at the end card here. He makes amazing videos, and I highly recommend his Agony review. Just be aware, mature content ahead.